All right, so today we're diving into something, well, pretty heavy. Raja Shehadeh's What Does Israel Fear from Palestine? I mean, just that title alone, right?
It grabs
It
you.
really does. And I always love digging into this kind of stuff. But you've brought us a book by, like, a leading Palestinian voice on this whole thing.
Oh, he's more than just a voice, though. I mean,
Yeah.
the guy's a lawyer, a human rights advocate, an award-winning author. He's lived this conflict, and that perspective, it makes his work so powerful, so insightful.
Yeah, see, this is why I love having you on. Always adding that extra layer. So the book, it really digs into this question of fear, right? But it starts somewhere, well, I think we often kind of gloss over. Like, how do Israelis and Palestinians even view the same history? Because they see it through such different lenses.
Totally.
Yeah.
1948's like the perfect example. For Israelis, it's the War of Independence, this triumphant return to their ancestral homeland. But for Palestinians, it's the Nakba, the catastrophe. It's mass expulsion from their homes.
Right. And Shehadeh, he doesn't shy away from, like, the emotional weight of that experience at all. He talks about this deliberate erasure of Palestinian history. And we're not just talking, like, symbolism here. I mean, renaming towns, planting forests over entire villages.
Imagine that, though. The places you knew growing up, the streets your grandparents walked on, gone, wiped off the map.
It's just gone.
Yeah.
And that's the reality for so many Palestinians. He tells the story about his grandmother. Heartbreaking, really. She had to flee Jaffa during the Nakba, and from her new home, she'd stare at these lights in the distance, convinced she was seeing her old city. Turns out, it was Tel Aviv.
Wow.
It just shows you, though, how deeply these losses are felt.
Generations later, even?
Yeah, exactly. And this is where I think Shehadeh's, like, central argument starts to take shape. He's saying this erasure, this refusal to even acknowledge the Palestinian narrative. It's at the heart of this whole thing. It's the heart of the conflict.
Because how can you even begin to build a future together when you can't even agree on the past? And that denial, it doesn't stop there. Even after 67, when Israel occupies the West Bank, Shehadeh, who lived through all this, he started seeing these chilling parallels to apartheid-era South Africa.
And it's not like these concerns were coming from the fringes or anything. He quotes Yitzhak Rabin, right, Prime Minister of Israel at the time. Even back in '76, he called the settlements a cancer. He was afraid they'd lead to an apartheid state. But then, on the other hand, you've got Ariel Sharon, another major Israeli figure, studying South Africa's Bantustans.
Which, just for people who don't know, that was a system of separate territories designed to segregate black South Africans. And Sharon, he didn't see it as some cautionary tale, he saw it as a model.
So instead of learning from South Africa's transition, like their move to a multiracial democracy, it seems like they took away a very different lesson.
They looked at this powerful minority clinging to control and thought, we could do that too.
Wow. And this kind of brings us to what at the time felt like a beacon of hope. The Madrid Peace Conference in '91. Shehadeh quotes Haidar Abdul Shafi, the Palestinian representative, and he's basically like, look, let's share this land. Let's build a future together.
Powerful words.
Right. But then the response from Israel, it was basically accusing him of distorting history.
Again, it always circles back to that fundamental problem. You can't have real peace not without acknowledging each other's narratives, even the painful parts.
Which leads us to Oslo. The Oslo Accords in '93, the handshakes, the Nobel Prizes, the whole thing. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where I think Shehadeh's take on it is so crucial. He calls Oslo a bitter disappointment.
Because it's like,
Yeah.
it created this appearance of progress, but in reality, it solidified Israel's control. Instead of ending the occupation, it just repackaged it. Think of it this way.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine if, instead of ending some restrictive rule over you, the authorities said, all right, you can elect a local council now, but we still control your borders. We control your resources. Oh, and we can still, build settlements wherever we want.
So it's like giving you this illusion of self-governance, but really they're just tightening the screws.
Yeah, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
And it's such a tough pill to swallow, you
Yeah.
know? Because there was so much hope around Oslo.
Right, and that's Shehadeh's point. He's saying Oslo basically created Palestinian Bantustans, these fragmented little territories, under nominal Palestinian control, but ultimately still under Israel's thumb.
And of course, through all of this, the settlements just kept expanding.
Exactly. Which brings us to the 2023-24 Gaza war. Even Shehadeh, right, a guy who'd seen decades of this conflict, even he was shocked by the level of devastation.
Yeah, the numbers are just staggering. 30,000 Palestinians killed, universities, cultural centers, just rubble.
Gone.
It wasn't just another conflict, you know.
Yeah.
Shehadeh argues this was about something way more unsettling.
He thought it was about breaking Palestine's spirit, about making a viable Palestinian state seem impossible. He even quotes Netanyahu. Netanyahu talked about wanting to turn Gaza into a deserted island.
It's one thing to do it, but then the language they use to describe it too, roof knocking, protective edge, it's like these terms just sanitize the brutality of it all.
Exactly, and that's the danger. Shehadeh talks about how this language, combined with like really tight media control, it meant that a lot of Israelis never even saw what was happening in Gaza.
The true extent of it.
Yeah, it's like there were two wars going on, the one on the ground, and then the one being presented through this, carefully constructed narrative.
Wow.
And it wasn't just Gaza either. Shehadeh, he highlights how the war, it kind of gave cover for all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Increased settler violence in the West Bank, more home demolitions, more Palestinian lives lost.
It's like this awful cycle.
Yeah.
Violence just fueling more violence. And it feels like there's no end in sight. So where do we even go from here? Is there any hope for a way out of this mess?
Well, this is where Shehadeh's book, it takes a bit of a turn. He actually ends on a, I'd say, cautiously optimistic note. Like, maybe, just maybe, this war could be the thing that sparks real change.
Okay, see, that's not what I was expecting to hear. What makes him think that?
Well, he points to a few things. For one, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, they ruled against Israel's actions in Gaza. That's a pretty big deal.
It is, but does it actually change anything on the ground?
That's the million-dollar question, right? But it does show a shift. Like, the global landscape is changing. He also talks about how the EU is at least talking about sanctions against Israel now, which is a huge departure from, how they've handled things in the past.
Right. And there's been a change in tone from the U.S., too, hasn't there?
Totally. Shehadeh mentions Biden condemning the home demolitions in East Jerusalem. He even said they, damage Israel's standing in the world. To hear that kind of criticism from the U.S., it's unprecedented, really, in recent years.
So maybe, just maybe, the tides are turning.
It's early to say for sure, but there are glimmers of hope out there, like cracks in that wall of impunity that Israel's enjoyed for so long.
Like that lawsuit against the UK for selling arms to Israel, even though it got dismissed, I mean. The fact that it even went to court.
Yeah, exactly. It shows people are starting to connect the dots. They're starting to hold those in power, those who profit from this conflict, accountable.
It sounds like Shehadeh is saying that this growing awareness, like this recognition of the power imbalances at play here, that's a crucial step towards actual change.
He is, yeah. And ultimately, it's about moving beyond fear.
Fear on both sides, right?
Absolutely. Because true security for one side, it can't come at the cost of the other's existence.
Which kind of brings us back to that initial question, doesn't it? What does Israel fear from Palestine?
Shehadeh, he asked that very question. He wonders if the fear isn't really about physical security, but about something else. About acknowledging Palestine's right to simply exist.
That's a powerful thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's something we all have to grapple with, not just in this conflict, but in a world where difference is so often met with fear and hostility.
It really makes you think.
It is.
Like, you need a minute to process that.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about something so basic, this fear of just acknowledging someone else's right to exist. It's a tough one.
It really is.
But that's what I think makes Shehadeh's, his whole proposed path forward. It's so compelling, He says true peace, it can only come when we move beyond that fear. But how do we do that?
That's the million-dollar question.
It feels impossible, right? Like, how do you bridge this divide?
Yeah, he doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
Yeah.
And he's very clear that there's no magic solution out there. But he keeps coming back to this need for a total shift in perspective. A comprehensive resolution, that's what he calls it. One that moves beyond that whole failed framework of Oslo.
So what does that actually look like, though?
Well, for one, he doesn't think the U.S. can be calling all the shots anymore. Like, they've been too one-sided for too long. He thinks you need a multi-party approach. Bring in the UN, a global South, everybody.
So more of a global effort, recognizing that this conflict affects everyone, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he also talks about this need to, remember each other's humanity. Recognize that one side's security, it can't come at the expense of the other side's existence,
Which takes us right back to that question from the beginning. What does Israel fear from Palestine?
Shehadeh's answer. He thinks it might be everything that real peace actually demands. Meaning a future where Israel's security isn't about controlling Palestinian land, controlling their resources. A future where Palestinians have self-determination, where they don't have to deal with checkpoints and settlements, where they can just, live without that constant fear.
It's a vision of, like, two states finally coexisting.
Yeah.
But is that even possible, though? I mean, given everything we've talked about.
Shehadeh seems to think it has to be. He says the alternative is just, it's too awful to contemplate. Not just in terms of, like, the loss of life, but the wasted potential on both sides.
So where do we fit into all of this? Like us, just regular people listening.
That's the question he leaves us with. He says we all have a responsibility, to educate ourselves, to challenge the narratives we hear, to demand better from our leaders.
To not just accept things as they are.
Right, because when we stay silent about injustice, well, we're basically complicit, aren't we?
This has been an intense one, like really thought-provoking stuff. Shehadeh's book, I'll be honest, it doesn't give us easy answers, but it makes us confront some hard truths. It really has me thinking, what can we each do in our own little corner of the world to help create a more just and peaceful future for everybody?
That's the question we should all be asking ourselves.
If you want to dig deeper into this, by the way, Raja Shehadeh's What Does Israel Fear from Palestine? It's not an easy read, but it's essential if you really want to understand this conflict and maybe, just maybe, see a path to a different future. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking those tough questions.